Welcome to Learn to Live Stress-Free. This is Christine Wright with Dr. Robert Wright Jr., your go-to wellness coaches of www.stressfreenow.info. Our featured guest today is Maureen Seaberg, speaking on her book, Struck by Genius. Maureen Seaberg is the co-author of Struck by Genius, How a Brain Injury Made Me a Mathematical Marvel. The story of Jason Padgett, who acquired synesthesia and Savant syndrome due to a brain injury sustained in a brutal mugging 11 years ago in Tacoma, Washington. Ms. Seaberg personally has higher and lower synesthesias. Her sensory experience of the letter K is teal, the number 8, aubergine, and she would have to become a glass artisan to describe what she sees when listening to Yo-Yo Ma. She also recently tested positive on a DNA test for tetrachromacy. She has presented on synesthesia at the Toward a Science of Consciousness conferences in Tucson and Stockholm, Yale Divinity School, the American Synesthesia Association Conference at Vanderbilt University, Science Writers in New York, Tibet House, and New York University. She has written for the New York Times, the Oprah magazine, ESPN, the magazine, Huffington Post, the Daily Beast, and has appeared on MSNBC and PBS. Hello, Maureen. We're glad to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
Hi, Maureen. We're so happy you could join us today.
Oh, thank you so much for your interest.
Maureen, please tell us about yourself and what led you to the work you are currently doing.
Well, when I was about 27 years old, which was so many years ago, I stumbled on a book by Dr. Richard Cytowic, and it was called The Man Who Tasted Shapes. And it was all about a case study of a man who had synesthesia. And for the first time in my life, I realized that that was what was going on with me. I have since childhood experienced numbers, letters, and music in colored shapes. And largely I kept this to myself. And as I dove into the book and spoke to a very generous Dr. Cytowic on the phone and got to know some other synesthetes, I realized there was a real need for raising awareness of this particular trait because most of us live in silence well into adulthood, and there's really no reason for that. And I also thought it would be really important to catch children early on and develop them as fully as possible. And so I was in the midst of all sorts of other reporting. I probably continued in traditional general assignment and crime reporting for another 10 years or so after that, but I knew in my heart that one day I really wanted to focus on it, and that's what I am doing now.
Wonderful. Thanks, Maureen. Could you tell us what is Struck by Genius about?
Well, Struck by Genius is my second book, and I co-authored it with the acquired savant and synesthete Jason Padgett. Jason was a man in Washington State who, until about 13 years ago, was living the life of Riley. He worked for his father's futon store, and so he couldn't get fired, and he took full advantage in a very good-hearted way and was out partying every night or at the gym and didn't really have a serious thought in his head, failed out of college. Until one night he was exiting a karaoke bar with friends, and two men jumped him and beat him pretty violently. Jason unfortunately suffered a head injury, but it has since been determined that he has become an acquired synesthete and a mathematical savant from the injury. So it's all about his journey, literally waking up on the sidewalk as a new person.
Incredible. How did you meet Jason Padgett, the subject of the book?
Oh, it's such an internet story. It wouldn't have been possible 20 years ago. I had written a previous book all about synesthesia called Tasting the Universe, and for that research, I set up on my Gmail account something called a Google Alert. I really recommend everyone get a Gmail account and set up these alerts on topics that interest you. It's easy to do. And what happens is, instead of you sitting and Googling the topic you want to know about, Google curates some content based on recommendations of other users, and things that they search out, and they occasionally dump content into your inbox. And what happened is Jason one day in November of 2010 uploaded a video of himself drawing, because one of his new skills as a savant and a synesthete is to draw the shapes he sees in relation to math, numbers and equations and concepts. And so there was this brand new YouTube video that was labeled Synesthesia and Savant Syndrome, and Google sent it to me. And I think the video only had about 43 views by the time I looked at it. And I immediately reached out to Jason through YouTube, because even though I'm a synesthete and am now very active in the synesthesia social and research communities, I had never seen any images as a result of synesthesia as complex as what Jason sees and draws. They're just gorgeous, lacy, complex drawings. And I was dying to talk to him. And he's a really forthcoming and friendly guy, even after the injury, very outgoing. And he was very nice to me, and we hit it off immediately. And in 2 weeks from that day, he had already planned to come to New York City with his wife on other business, and so I asked to meet, and we did, and then we teamed up. So it seems very random, but in a way it wasn't as well.
That's fascinating. Thank you.
That's a wonderful story, Maureen.
Yeah, it was meant to be, I think.
Yes. It sounds like a synchronicity as well as being serendipitous.
Yeah.
Maureen, what forms of synesthesia does Jason have?
Well, Jason responds to numbers, equations, and mathematical and sort of physics concepts with these very complex shapes, which he draws. He's really compelled to draw. He just, he can sit for hours and hours and draw these things out. So there are artists in the synesthesia community who are doing the same, and I'm really grateful for them. It's helping to increase people's awareness and show how beautiful some of this stuff really is. But Jason, I would say, has the most unique form, visual experience that I've ever seen, and the most complex. Now, his isn't so much based on color as shape. So he renders the shapes that he sees and then adds color over it just to make it more interesting.
Okay, how interesting. What about yourself, Maureen? What forms of synesthesia do you have?
Well, so far, I have Grapheme Synesthesia, which is to see a colored aura over my letters and numbers. I have colored music, which is to see shape, moving colored shapes when I listen to music. For example, if I'm listening to Yo-Yo Ma play Bach's Prelude in G, I get these wavy images that are very, very glossy and mocha colored that are something like the Christmas peppermints that fold over themselves like waves. But instead of peppermint colors, they're mocha colored. And I have motion to hearing synesthesia, which I discovered recently through an online test. It means that when things move, I sometimes get noise, ambient noise, and it's not in the environment. It's, well, we think it's not, right? It's unique to me. And I'm also, I must have a lot of mirror touch neurons, which synesthetes tend to have a preponderance of. These are neurons in our own brains that communicate with the neurons of other people's brains. And everyone has them, which proves we're all connected. But synesthetes have them at such a high percentage that they tend to be empathic, highly empathic. And so I do a good read on a room of strangers. For example, I'll pretty much get a sense of who everyone is before meeting them. And sometimes I find crowds really overstimulating because there's just a cacophony of energy good and bad in being around a lot of people. And I'm a New Yorker, so you can just imagine. I'm often around a lot of people.
Well, this is such amazing and very, very unusual and little heard of, unfortunately. Can you explain something else for our audience? How does acquired savant syndrome work?
Okay, that's a great question. The leading expert on Savant syndrome is Dr. Daryl Treffert of Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. He was the real Rain Man, Kim Peek's doctor. And he has had over 400 cases of Savant syndrome, which is the way it usually happens is people are born with it, and they have these very, very highly specialized gifts, often in mathematics or the arts. There are only 30 cases that Dr. Treffert has dealt with acquired savant syndrome. And so to be an acquired savant is to be someone who either through injury or illness becomes a savant later in life. And that is what happened to Jason Padgett.
Okay, so that's pretty amazing. What does Maureen? What does the acquired savant syndrome tell us about the latent potentials in all of us?
Well, I remember Jason and I road tripped together to see Dr. Treffert in Wisconsin. We kind of met in Chicago and drove the rest of the way from our respective coasts. And when I was with Dr. Treffert, he said, Maureen, you have to remember one thing about Jason. Nothing was added or created when he was injured. These are not memories that existed that were released because he had no memory of higher math. He hadn't been exposed to it, ever. He never made it past pre-algebra, and yet he can do calculus now. And the other thing is he calls it genetic memory, meaning we literally inherit memory from our ancestors, much in the same way that birds know to fly south, and butterflies, monarch butterflies, return to the same 23-acre patch in Mexico year after year after year. And we often give the animal kingdom credit for having strong instincts that are inborn. But I don't think most people consider that we are the same. We have them too. And in Jason's case, it seems to have been some remarkable rewiring that occurred that drew on all of the capabilities to do math in his past. So the reason I know this is in all of us is there are other cases like Jason. There is a man who was struck by lightning who is now a piano prodigy. There's another man who hit his head on the bottom of a pool who is also a composer now. And I mean excellent, excellent work in both their cases, nothing average at all. So it has happened to others before. It will happen again. And there is a doctor in Australia, Dr. Alan Snyder, who I've had the pleasure of meeting at conferences, who has actually created a machine called a transcranial stimulator. Well, he didn't invent transcranial stimulation, but what he did was he adapted it and created what is called a thinking cap to stimulate people's brains electrically. Now, when people put the thinking cap on, they draw better. They go from drawing stick figures to like beautifully rendered illustrations. They answer multiple choice questions better. And then when you remove the thinking cap, you return to normal 45 minutes later, according to his research. So this shows that it can also be done without injury, without some severe central nervous system event like Jason had. And I think this is the future. I think we will know how to turn these things on and off. And it will be in the marketplace, no doubt, one day.
Wow, Maureen, I have to tell you that is pretty amazing. I want to thank you for sharing your expertise with our audience and
My
being our
pleasure.
guest today, because the things that you have said are just, I'm sure our audience will find pretty amazing and will perhaps look into that.
I hope so. And there's more about all of these things in the book Struck by Genius. And it's really a very futuristic work, but all based in solid research. So I hope that people do look into it that way.
Thank you, Maureen. It's really been wonderful listening to you and learning from this. I would think that many in our audience may not have ever heard of synesthesia. Certainly, taking a look at your book, Struck by Genius, will give more information. And you just give so much new meaning, even the term mirror neurons.
Oh, thank you.
That we all have them and that they're there and active. And how many times have we heard in school, put on your thinking cap? So,
now there is one.
Yeah. Where can our listeners get in touch with you, follow you, and learn more about what you're doing in addition to your book?
Okay, well, I am on both Facebook and Twitter as Synesthesia Gal, which is SYN like Nancy, ESTHESIAGAL. I'm easy to find on both places, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you so much. So,
my pleasure.
For those interested, you can contact Maureen at Synesthesia Gal on both Facebook and Twitter.
Maureen, I want to just thank you for being on today's show. And what final thoughts or key idea would you like our audience to take away from today's broadcast?
Well, you may know that there's a film called Lucy out there starring Scarlett Johansson and Morgan Freeman. And while it's an incredibly dramatic ride, it is based on the false notion that we only use 10% of our brains. That is not true. We use far more than that. But what I can offer is that we could still use even more of our brains and just really blow it out to the degree that Jason Padgett is experiencing. And we need to do more and more brain research to make this possible one day. And to heal people as well. You know, perhaps we could find ways for people with deficits of some sort to overcome them and rewire pathways around their deficits. So I would really like people to take away that when you hear about the government spending money on brain research, it's money well spent, and I really think there should be more and more of it. President Obama has something now called the Brain Initiative, and it was funded in 2014 with $100 million. I believe there's $200 million earmarked for it in the 2015 budget. And just like the space program created a lot of side benefits to technology, I really think that the American public and the worldwide public will be the beneficiaries of the research that the scientists do in this new initiative.
Wow, Maureen, I'm so taken with your remarks and all the things that you've brought to the table here today, new things that many people would not have been aware of previously. And I want to thank you for being our featured guest today, Maureen. And I want to thank our audience for listening, wherever you are, in whatever time zone you are in. We welcome and look forward to your comments about our show. Please contact us through our website with your feedback and suggestions. Remember, listeners, if you'd like to experience the same benefits our coaching clients get with us and learn how to get control of your schedule or easy ways to dissolve your chronic pain, stress, or anxiety, feel free to call us at 954-900-2179. Mention that you heard our Stress Free Now podcast show, and your first session is absolutely free. Call today to schedule your appointment. For Christine Wright, this is Dr. Robert Wright, Jr. of www.stressfreenow.info. Until next time, be safe and be well.